All right, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Building the Ultimate Streaming Architecture. Very happy to have you here this morning on Wednesday, and we hope everyone's going to find this very informative. It's an interesting webinar with a really awesome video expert, Omer Luzzatti from Yahoo. So before we get started, I just want to, obviously talk a little bit about the two companies that are bringing this webinar to you. That's the Streaming Video Alliance. And in case you're interested, you can always visit our website at thestreamingvideoalliance.org. And this webinar is also brought to you by Yahoo, and we all know who Yahoo is, so you can visit yahoo.com to get all sorts of content and whatnot from that wonderful company. Now, our two presenters today, we have, like I mentioned before, Omer Luzzatti, the Senior Director of Video from Yahoo. He's going to provide us lots of really awesome information about streaming architectures and about the challenges that Yahoo has faced in streaming some really, really big live events. And by the end of the webinar, you should have a pretty good sense of what you need to do in order to deliver video out at broadcast quality to very large audiences. And myself, I am Jason Thibeault, the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance. I'll be sort of the interviewer / moderator today. Although we do have slides to show you, the session is going to be very interactive between Omer and myself, and we're going to talk a lot about what he's doing and how he's doing it and how Yahoo is approaching the industry and how Yahoo is approaching streaming video. So just keep in mind that it's going to be very informal, and if you have questions, there is a question tool in your GoToWebinar toolbar on usually the right-hand side of your screen. If you've got a question, you can ask it privately or you can send it to everybody. And what we'll do at the end of the webinar is we will address any audience questions. And of course, you have our email addresses here on the screen as well. So if you have any questions after the fact, you can always reach either Omer or myself via email, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. All right, so before we kick off talking with Omer about streaming video and what Yahoo's been doing, let's talk a little bit about the market. Why is this even important to have this kind of discussion? Well, the first thing is this is a graph from, it's a couple-year-old study from Nielsen about SVOD penetration. And what's really interesting about this is not the fact that there's lots of SVOD being consumed or lots of OTT video being consumed. What's interesting is how much penetration these services are getting year over year in the home. So what we're seeing is a large increase in the amount of people that are consuming on-demand and live content over the internet. So that's really that when we start talking about why is it important to pay attention to streaming architectures, this is really the reason, is that these services, the demand for these services is growing exponentially. And it's really becoming important that as you start to think about building out an OTT service or a live service over the internet or an SVOD service, whatever you're thinking about building for online video, has to keep into account the demand that's growing for these kinds of services. And just to put that into perspective a little more, of course, we've got these numbers from Netflix. Now, they're about a year old. And I apologize for that. I was really searching for something very, very relevant on Netflix subscription information. But you can kind of get the picture here from the graph, even though the data is a little bit, out of date, is that Netflix is growing significantly, both internationally and nationally. And that's important, again, to demonstrate the fact that consumer demand for the kind of content they can get when they want it, where they want it, how they want it, is increasingly becoming important as part of what we can term as the television experience, right? The television experience is changing. More people are consuming content on demand and content over the internet, and that's really important. That's driving what these services have to do to build out in order to meet this consumer demand. So you can't just, churn up a server and throw some video on it and hope for the best. Your service is never going to survive in this very highly competitive market of online video content if you're not delivering it at broadcast quality, and that's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today with Omer. So with that said, before we jump into some of these questions that I've got for Omer and some of the slides that we're going to talk about, why don't I have Omer give a little bit of an overview of himself and just kind of what he does at Yahoo and some of the things that he's involved with, so you get a sense of who it is that's going to be giving you a lot of information today. So Omer, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you, Jason. So briefly about myself, I started my career in actually VocalTech. That was the first voice over IP company back in the late 90s. I was in charge of algorithms there. Then in 2007, I started a company for peer-to-peer live streaming. That was a UDP streaming, obviously utilizing the peers upstream. But down that path, we started to build a complete OTT solution. We broadcasted the NBA internationally since 2010, 2011. Blizzard was a customer of ours, Fox Sports and other, most of them utilizing the peer-to-peer solution, but obviously that was backed up with additional CDNs and our own infrastructure and so on. The company was acquired by Yahoo mid-2014. And since then, I was in charge of the video platform, several components of the video platform, not the entire solution, the Yahoo CDN, the transcoding, feed ingest, and so forth, and the player and the CMS, or what we call internally the SAPI solution. For the NFL, I was in charge of most parts of that of our solution, of our streaming solution, and as we will discuss during this presentation, we obviously succeeded above expectations, our expectations, and the NFL expectation. It was a very successful event, and I can talk about what was needed, what we needed to build in order to be successful for that event. Obviously, as you all know, Yahoo, Verizon deal, this is something that is changing our focus, and this year we slightly changed our focus from live streaming of big events to VOD, trying to increase revenue of the VOD solution that we have in Yahoo and millions and millions of viewers that we have daily. So that was my focus in the last, I would say, 6 months, transitioning from the focus on live to focus on revenue and VOD. Jason?
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting, Omer. That's fantastic information. And I think what's very interesting is it gives a much larger perspective that you have on both live events and VOD. So you've got in your brain, you've got an understanding of what it takes to deliver both these kinds of content, which is fantastic. And that gets me to my first real question for you. So let's say that an organization wants to start streaming, but they don't want to use YouTube or Facebook, or they want to own the entire end-to-end experience. They want to be like Yahoo, right? So what are the components they need to implement, and how do those components fit together to deliver the stream? And I think we can start off sort of answering that question with this first slide that you've got here.
Yeah. So even before diving into the slide and the different components, I think the first question the organization or any streamer has to have is, what exactly am I aiming for in terms of what type of content, what type of audience, how is my audience using the content, and what are the KPIs that I care about? Is it buffering ratio? Is it very high quality? Is it fast startup? The reason that we needed to change things, transitioning from live to VOD or emphasizing other elements, is because several algorithms and several KPIs are actually different. In the case of VOD, especially if you have autoplay as well, and this is again one of the questions that you need to ask yourself as an organization. If I have autoplay, I need a very fast startup. If I need a very fast startup, then I cannot have a very long buffer that can overcome network problems. So I can expect my buffering ratio to be a little bit higher than, for example, when I have an NFL game and I expect people to watch for 1 hour, and then I can have 2-3 seconds in the beginning before I even join the stream. So we will talk a little bit about this with several examples, but I want to, for the audience, I think the first question is exactly this. Who am I? What am I? What's my content? What is my expectation of how the users will behave? And what are the KPIs that I care about? Is it revenue? Is it startup? Is it buffering ratio? And so on and so forth.
Okay, no, that's very interesting.
Let's start going over the components. Let's start with the acquisition of the content. So in here, and maybe I'll actually follow it with several examples. Again, the NFL example is another. Signal acquisitions is obviously, the place where you get your content, if that content is live or VOD. VOD normally you may get from the content owner if you're not the content owner yourself. In some storage, normally you will need to manipulate that storage or to move it from one storage to another. In the case of live, that's even more complex because either you get it by signal from the satellites or you can get it from fiber. In the case of, for example, the NFL, we had 2 locations, one in Dallas, one here in Sunnyvale, with acquisitions from the air, from satellites. And then we had fiber also coming to us from basically CBS that were originating the signal from London. So basically it went from London over satellite and over fiber to locations in the CBS locations in Atlanta, I believe. From Atlanta, it went again up the air because it was also broadcasted over TV in Buffalo and in Nashville and over fiber to our locations in Texas and Sunnyvale. All that, and you can imagine, it comes with a cost. All that because you want to make sure that even if the fiber fails or even if you have weather problems with satellites, you can always overcome those problems with additional streams that you have. Each stream goes to an encoder. Each encoder transcoding values quality and send it again, normally over fiber to CDNs and our own CDN. But let's continue. Then you may have studios. In the case of the NFL, we actually had what we call fans channel with 2 guys coming from the cities that were playing to Sunnyvale in here. We got the signal, and on top of the signal, we put the pictures or the videos of these guys talking about the game, commenting, arguing, and so on and so forth. So that's also another stream that we had for the NFL. In addition to that, now we get into the question of the ad stitching, which is also part of the acquisition in some cases. Now, the question of ads was, from the beginning, one of the biggest questions that we had. Because normally, you can think of these games, these events, and you want to maximize the revenue, so you want to have some kind of personalized ads.
Absolutely.
Personalized ads would mean that you are getting the ads to the player and you are switching, you're transitioning from the game to the ad on the player itself. We hesitated And my recommendation to management here was, let's do something different in this case. Revenue will not be that much affected, and we will guarantee a much better quality, because we weren't sure, and it's still very problematic to have all the elements done on the player side. So actually what we did, Yahoo sales team went and sold the game to, Toyota, Walmart, and other big companies like that, and Yahoo has the ability to do it. This is the way that Yahoo traditionally sold content and ads. And this company bought, for millions of dollars, obviously, the slots. So we actually had the ad stitching done on the stream itself at the original place before even transcoding it and going to HLS or what have you as a streaming protocol, before even sending it to the internet. So it was done, I would say, the TV way and not, so to speak, the internet way.
Very interesting.
If you want to guarantee quality and smooth transition between content and ads, that's the best solution you have. I would not recommend it necessarily today because we have learned a lot and there are additional ways to do it, but back then it was definitely the right decision. Then you go to manipulation. Manipulation, the bullets that we put here, encoding, transcoding, ad ingest, I can elaborate more about that later on. Yep. Enrichment is something slightly different. Enrichment is, we also have a slide about it, but I can comment also here, is basically additional, we normally see it as type of machine learning, additional stuff that you can do on the content. For example, you can have the highlights created while the stream is ongoing, and so that you have summaries of the games and so on. These are the type of enrichment. Finding the best thumbnail to put as the first part of your VOD. This is mostly for VOD, and only today we see types of enrichment being done on live content as well, which is a little bit more problematic in terms of CPU and so on. Sure. Content protection is also done in this manipulation part. The way that we build this slide is you have prepare, deliver, and present. This we will have also for the data, and below it we have the acquisition, manipulation. Then you have the storage and delivery. We will talk about CDN, multi-CDN approaches, and so on, and obviously the storage. Then the type of experiences you want in terms of where do you want your viewers to watch it, on desktops, on mobile, on TV sets. We were, and I'll say it right away now, we have a team of like maybe 15 guys building for TV sets, Apple TV, Fire, and all these components that are basically the big screen or are attached to your big screen, to your big TV. We were super surprised by the number of viewers watching on these devices, basically on the big screen. Our estimation was, I would say, by a factor of 20 lower than the number of actually viewers that watch on the big screen. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of viewers that watch it on Apple TV, on additional connected devices such as, obviously, less Amazon Fire. I don't remember exactly the breakdown, but we were super surprised by it. So it's worth the effort. And also, it affects, obviously, the highest quality that you want to provide. We had 60 frames per second with 6 megabits per second for these type of devices, because obviously you don't need that for a mobile phone, but and it was proven, again, successful and important. Samsung TVs, even people simply using the Samsung TVs with the UI on the TV itself, to find content and so on. And then again, what are the KPIs in terms of product? What are the KPIs that are important? What are the applications? How your audience is using the application? And I'll touch on Facebook Live, on Snapchat. It's a completely different behavior. And because of that, it's a completely different emphasis on what's important and what not, starting from quality, going to start time, going to adaptive bitrate, and all the components are affected mainly by the behavior of your viewers.
So this is really interesting from a content flow, right? So you did a really great job of explaining how the content gets from acquisition to down to the player, and then you're starting to touch upon something really interesting, which is another slide that you provided, which was the data flow, right? So can you talk a little bit about the data that's being generated by these videos and by this video stream, and sort of what an organization needs to keep in mind about that flow as well?
Yeah. Now, the separation of actually, I was only creating this lately. So separating content from data is something that to some degree makes sense, because in addition to your content flow, the actual video, you have the data itself that is coming, the metadata that is attached to that video. Now, the metadata, obviously in the case of, let's take again 2 examples, and I can start to think about it out loud. The example of the NFL. So what metadata do you have on top of the game itself and on top of the stream? Obviously, in the case of the NFL, the stream kind of, and the fact it's such a big event, and so the metadata is almost irrelevant. But if you want to add to it, for example, the score and some statistics that you get about the players, and you want your viewers, because obviously they're watching, most of them are watching on the internet and on the desktops. They can open another window, and basically maybe they want to see stats. Now that stat will be completely out of sync with what they're watching, with the content itself, because the content, assuming that you're doing for such a big audience, and that's actually an important point, you have to assume around 24 to 40 seconds delay between the game itself and what the viewers are actually watching on their screens.
Huh.
That's an important, when the first moment that we got the deal with the NFL, I was talking to management here, and I said, we have to expect this delay. We will not be able to do something better than, let's say, 24, 30, 40 seconds. And I was challenged. People ask me, but how come? I remember one executive coming and saying, but I watch Fox on my mobile, and it's just like TV. And it was funny because I said to him, no way. It's not just like TV. So we all went outside to the corridor where we have TV, and we opened the mobile phone, and indeed there was something like even 50-second delay between the mobile and the TV. Now with that obviously comes the question, but people will tweet the result. So if we are lagging behind the actual game in 30 seconds, what will be the effect of people tweeting and so on and so forth? It was one of the risks that we had in mind, but during the game itself, we hadn't noticed any type of messages or tweets saying, these teams scored, or the other team, something has happened and you haven't watched it yet. Okay, so that's just one example about the data and what you have to keep in mind when you have data and you have, for example, live event. In VOD, the question that most companies ask is about discovery of the VOD content. And Some companies also ask about recommendation and how people will move from one video to another. How do we bring relevant videos to the video that now is being, the user is watching, and so on. All these questions are questions that are related to data. So again, on the global scheme, it's prepare, deliver, and present. More into the details, you have to create or to get this data. There are enrichment that I spoke a little bit about before, smart tagging, highlights, thumbnails. Those are not done on the content itself. Auto tagging, now we have technologies that enable us to understand what's going on in the video, in the picture, in the images themselves, and maybe to auto tag, this is a celebrity. That's one example. Now we have nudity, we have to rate this content differently. All these emerging technologies are something that are done and create data that can then be interpreted and used. The question of rights. Yes, Jason, go ahead.
No, that's very interesting. So you made a comment in the enrichment section about those actions are not carried out on the content. So is it something that's handled through the data?
No. That's your own point here. The analytics is done on the content itself. We analyze the VOD and we try to we identify if there is nudity, for example, there, or actually something that isn't even worse than that with criminal cases. So with criminal implications. So we do that, and then we basically create a data flow saying, tagging this video as a video that needs to go some kind of processes or others. Tagging, things that will help you with better ads or to identify the content. All these things some of them are done on the content itself, but they create something that is different, that is basically data that you then need to.
Okay, I understand.
But obviously, yeah, some of these are done on the content itself. Okay. The right and security in all DRM discussion, obviously, that's one of the biggest decisions that any corporate needs to do. It's not only, okay, let's leave it there. We can have a complete long discussion about DRM and so on. Personalization. Creating for your users something that is personalized, either in the sense of videos that are related to something else they're doing. I'll give the example of Yahoo. So obviously we want the content to be, if you go to nfl.yahoo.com as a sport page, then obviously we want within that one, if we do recommendation, we want them to be on additional NFL, but not only, right? If you are a fan of the San Francisco team, maybe we want to show you also now clips of Golden State, of the basketball team of your area, and not only of additional NFL videos. This is personalization. This drives additional usage, additional views, and this is something that in the last 6 months we emphasize a lot. We try to bring more audience, more personalization to those pages so that people will stay obviously longer on the page. We know the stats of YouTube, of Netflix. Basically the stats, the question is how many clicks you on average you have on the following video, right? If I'm watching now on YouTube a video X, what are the chances I will go to one of the videos they suggest, usually on the right side? And the numbers are varied in between 7% to 12% in some cases. Obviously, there is a difference between YouTube and Netflix in terms of the type of the content and so on. But this is what you should kind of aim for if you're building a recommendation system or a personalization system with several videos on one page.
Oh, very, very interesting.
Discovery is a problem, is a question for many corporations. How will the audience discover my content? Sync, I a little bit spoke about. KPIs, monetization, obviously, is one of the biggest questions here. Okay, let's move on now.
Sure, sure. So you've got there's a lot of components and pieces that are involved in streaming, whether it's a live event or on-demand content. So that brings up the question of infrastructure. And obviously organizations are thinking about, hey, I want to deliver my video, but what do I need in the back end? And can you talk a little bit about what are some of the bottlenecks in streaming architectures, and what are some of the considerations that organizations need to keep in mind as they're thinking about the infrastructure side of this problem?
Sure. So let's again talk a little bit about the content and the KPIs, and then we'll talk about in each case requires different things. That's basically what my point here is. Live versus VOD, it affects not only, how does it affect the infrastructure? It affects not only the acquisition, it also affects to some degree if you're building your own CDN, and here in Yahoo we have our own CDN, that obviously it affects how you do caching. If you're Snapchat, obviously you want the VODs to be, again, as close to the viewers as possible. With live content, it's a little bit more, caching is different, significant in some cases. You cannot pre-cache, you cannot preload the servers with your VOD or with the VODs that you expect people to watch. Short form versus long form, again, Netflix is different than Snapchat here. Premium versus UGC content, we now see the Facebook Live, Periscope, all these type of content. Again, it affects how people are watching, what the infrastructure is, how caching is done, and so on and so forth.
And on the short form versus long form, so part of a streaming infrastructure, as you pointed out in the component slide, is storage. So does that really impacts how much storage you need as well, right? I mean, because you're storing smaller video files versus larger ones?
Yes, it has several questions here. One is what type of storage what kind of content you're saving, you need to store, and for how long, right? Normally I would say that the long form and the non-UGC is content that you need to store for longer times. Now, if you're an organization and you want to be wise and you want to be also you're cost sensitive, then how you utilize the CDNs, or actually the AWS type of services, the cloud type of services, this is a decision that you can take. Let's go, maybe if you go over several examples, it would be the best. Netflix, they went obviously one step forward and farther by creating the Open Connect solution. That solution, I will cautiously, I will say, should have enabled them to be almost in the last mile in terms of within the ISPs themselves, and to deliver the content from those caching services directly to the viewers. This is something that Google, with paying to the ISPs in many cases, actually, the Netflix Comcast deal also was an agreement between Netflix paying Comcast, but is managed to put within the ISPs components again, to save or to deliver better in the last mile. We in Yahoo for the NFL, almost just as a test case, we directly work with Comcast in order to deliver the stream directly to their own internal CDN, so that we have much better performance for Comcast users watching the game. And indeed, the buffering ratio that we had with Comcast was incredibly low. I mean, much lower than using external to the ISP's services such as our own, right? We have our own CDN, which doesn't sit within the ISP. And also, okay, so that maybe puts a little bit light on what you need to consider and how much deeper you want to go directly and closer to your viewers. Actually, in SBA, Jason, as obviously you know, there is an open caching approach trying to provide at least a scheme or an APIs and so on and so forth for third-party vendors to be able to create and put within the ISPs several components to ease on the last mile.
Well, that actually brings up an interesting question. You know, because yes, the Streaming Video Alliance is working on an open caching initiative to enable, you know, ISPs and whatnot to cache popular content and extend that content closer to the end user. But from an organization standpoint, so again, I want to stream my video. I don't want to use YouTube. I want to build my architecture. You gave me all the components, and you know, understanding how these things are going to impact my infrastructure. How do I expand my infrastructure without having to build out a lot of new stuff? Like, I don't want to add new data centers. You know, should I just get multiple CDNs? What should I do?
Yeah, so I would recommend, obviously, for most content owners and aggregators, they don't own the CDN, they don't want to build the CDN, it doesn't make sense to build the CDN. So using multi-CDN approach is the approach that I would recommend. Now, why multi-CDN? We used, by the way, 7 CDNs for the NFL. We obviously used Yahoo. I mentioned Comcast as just one example, but all the usual suspects from Akamai, Level 3, Limelight, Edgecast, and so on and so forth. We utilized all of them. We tested them with millions concurrent viewers weeks before the event, just to know which one performs better and where, in which geographical locations. And during the game, we switched close to 29 times, which we switched the distribution of viewers among these CDNs.
Wow.
And yes, and why is that? And now we do it automatically. When we see one CDN performing less than another CDN in a certain geographic area or for specific devices, which is again something to note. Several CDNs perform better on different qualities and different devices. Today, when we analyze it, we switch automatically between CDNs. Back then, a year ago, we switched during the game, noticing changes and differences. Maybe I'll just to give a taste of it. In one case, there was simply a fiber cut that happened in Dallas because of a storm that was during that day. So one CDN completely failed, and we couldn't, you know, all the viewers, we had around 200,000 viewers during that moment watching using that CDN, and it completely failed. Obviously, with some mechanism that we had within the player also, all these viewers switched to another CDN. And we took that CDN out of rotation, obviously. In another case, we saw that internationally, one of the CDN is not performing well. We switched those viewers and newcomers to other CDN that was performing very well internationally. So that was also kind of an obvious case because we were talking about, something like 2.5, 3% rebuffering ratio on the bad CDN. In most other cases, it was nuances of switching in order to improve quality and so on and so forth. So yes, so I'm a big advocate of a multi-CDN approach. And obviously, it's not that easy to build a tool that analyzes all the results from all the players. Most companies use third parties such as Conviva to have those the live metric in front of your eyes, and then you can decide and switch. We had Conviva and our own analytic solution. And that's the way we wanted to validate that, that each analytic solution is actually accurate, and B, as you understand, it was a very large event, very important for Yahoo. So we had the leverage to, to utilize more than one metric, more than one analytic system.
Yeah. So okay. So thinking about that, right? So we've got components, we've got infrastructure, and really what it comes down to is consumers want a broadcast quality experience, right? They want their online video to operate like their TV. So it was very interesting that you gave that story about your executive watching Fox on his mobile and saying it was just like TV, because that's what consumers want. And that means providing them the appropriate bit rate for their specific environment, their device, their location, and whatnot. How is this really accomplished? I mean, what data elements do organizations need to really capture in order to provide a broadcast quality experience?
Yeah, and maybe, Jason, actually the next slide. I will talk about this slide, but no, actually one more. Yeah, I will talk about this slide. With this slide, I can explain a little bit more about the quality and what is needed. Before that, I do want somewhat to challenge the assumption that users want high quality. Obviously, in the case of the NFL, that is 100% true. But from discussions and analysis that we did, because again, in the last month we are focusing on VOD and mobile devices, what we see, and we analyze Snapchat and Facebook to that regard, what we actually see is that engagement and time used and as a bifactor revenue, actually users are ready to tolerate much lower quality than expected. And for example, in the case of Snapchat, switching from one video to another. So in the case of, again, this is from our analytics. I'm not sure this data is completely accurate, but we see sometimes videos coming from Facebook and Snapchat that are something like 200 kilobits per second quality. Now, without ABR, these are MP4 normally. And the reason is not because they cannot deliver higher quality and not because it would cost them. Obviously not in the case of Facebook, but I would assume also not in the case of Snapchat. The reason is because it's a faster download, it's a faster start time, which is much more important in their cases than quality. On Snapchat, the average time that a user is watching a video is, again, our estimation and a little bit several discussions we had, below 3 seconds. Okay, so normally a user goes, watch the first 2-3 seconds and switches to another video. In that case, obviously, start time is much more important than quality. Okay, so just be aware of the question, what actually my viewers want, and so on and so forth. Also, again, it depends on the type of the video. If it's a moving head or sport, you require higher quality and so on. In any case, back to your question, Jason. For the NFL, obviously, we wanted the highest possible quality. Start time wasn't that important. People can wait even 3 seconds or just watch a banner before actually joining the game, enabling us to analyze better the network, to start using ABR in this or that way, and so on. So the first question is, what's the size of the screen that your viewers are watching on? If it's the full screen, as you see on the left side, the 5-player sizes that we had. In the case of a very large video, very large screen, and very large player, in that case, you obviously want to be able to get to much higher qualities and much higher bandwidth, like the 6 megabits that I mentioned before. But if someone is watching on a mobile, you want to limit even if the network is perfect, there is no reason to go to this type of high quality because no one can notice the difference between a 6 meg and a 3 meg on a mobile phone. So you want to limit the highest bitrate that you provide in the case of in those different cases. You want to also limit the lowest one, because to watch on a 60-inch on a big TV, to watch at 200 kilobits per second, people will simply complain because it's terrible. Even a 1 megabit is to some degree not very bad. So you want to start your ABR from not in all cases. You want to start with the 150 kilobits per second or your lowest quality, right? So the size affects the ABR and affects the maximum quality and the low quality. Also, your devices. What type of device do you have? Because in most cases, you don't even you cannot even show a 60 frames per second. That is true, for example, for Safari. On Safari, we tried 60 frames per second. We couldn't deliver 60 frames per second on Safari. And again, we couldn't deliver on some Samsung TV. Even though they should support 60 frames per second, in the case of the internet and the streams that we tried, we couldn't get to 60 frames per second. However, there is I'm just complexing things here a little bit, but there is a difference between a 6 megabit per second and a 3 megabit per second on those big Samsung screens. So you want to deliver a 6 megabit per second, but you cannot in 60 frames per second. So you want to have another version of the stream with 6 megabit per second and 30 frames per second. Okay? So as you can understand, there is a multiplication of variations here of the player itself, the devices that users are watching, the browsers even they are using, and obviously the geographical zones of that and the ISPs of that individual, of that user. In order to be able to cope with all this, in order to be able to create something that can provide each user with the own ABR, with the own maximum quality, lowest quality variation of the stream, we had to build what we call the policy server that basically enables us to understand what where the viewer is, what devices the user is using, and to optimize specifically for that user. It's not that complex to build, and there are some external companies that start to provide these services. If you go to MLBAM, Hulu, they have similar type of solutions that can provide a more specific than just one stream with variations, just one ABR kind of metadata file, manifest file that can provide only one version of the stream.
Okay, so
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so that's obviously really important. Is organizations need to understand who they're delivering to, and I get that. I get your point about broadcast quality, and that's very interesting. It's understanding that there are different considerations for what is quote unquote quality depending upon the screen and device and type of content that's being delivered. So that's a very poignant point to make for organizations that are thinking about streaming. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to get to sort of one last question, because you talked a lot about the NFL, which was great, and understanding some of the considerations that Yahoo had in delivering that content out to a variety of different devices and a variety of different users is interesting. What are if you had to sum things up, if you had to tell somebody, so if somebody came to you and said, Omer, I need you to tell me what are some of the key challenges that organizations face in streaming video? Like, what are your top 5 challenges? What would you say to them?
Okay. Again, let me try and think out loud. The first question I would ask is, what is your expectation, and to how many concurrent viewers you expect to get, and so on and so forth. And that's a huge question and a huge debate within organizations. Obviously, between us, between the sales guys, and between management, and how much you would pay the NFL and so on, that was the first big question. Trying to take TV numbers and assume that you will have the same type of numbers over the internet is obviously completely wrong. Down to it, we got an estimation, from several hundreds to millions and millions of viewers, and we landed in a very good spot. We have one slide, Jason, showing some numbers here, and maybe it's worth jumping to that slide with the NFL and with other cases. I think it might be back. Maybe go back 1 or 2. Yes, this one. So for biggest events over the internet, these are pretty much the numbers. The finals of the FIFA World Cup was 3.5 million in 2014. We had more than 3 million in 2015 with our NFL game. And this year we saw 1 million with the esports event. YouTube claimed to have for the last debate, Trump-Clinton, 2 million concurrent. Okay? Which is a very, very nice number for politics, obviously. So don't expect 20 million. And probably the network, I try to analyze and to come to our management stating, guys, if we will get 20 million, simply the network cannot support it today. So I tried to aggregate data about network ability, interconnect, namely from the CDNs to the ISPs, how much bandwidth and how much connection you have there, what's the maximum capacity that Akamai can support in the US, what's the maximum capacity that Limelight could support, and to try and to aggregate, even though in some cases it doesn't even sum up, because Akamai and Limelight may use the same interconnect to, say, Verizon, right? So the bottleneck is the link, the interconnect link, and not so much what Akamai has with Verizon and what Limelight has with Verizon. So so you have to be careful not overestimating the numbers. I remember even Twitter now that is broadcasting on the Thursday nights, the NFL, the numbers are in between 200 to 300,000 concurrent and something like that. So, and this is the NFL, and this is Thursday night, and this is obviously very, very big event.
So it's be realistic is your advice to people about predicting what kind of traffic they're going to actually be delivering.
Right. That's the first one. The second one is estimate or try to figure out try to come with KPIs again, I'm talking probably, like a tech organization within a larger organization. Try to come with KPIs that are important, that you can justify the need for those KPIs as the main KPI, and to come with a number that makes sense. Again, NFL, the example, we decided that buffering ratio is the most important factor for us for that game, namely the quality in terms of that the stream itself is not being disrupted and you don't see the circling buffering screen. And we decided on, and the average on the market was 1.4. We got that data from Conviva, 1.4% rebuffering ratio for large events as these. So with management here, we agreed that 1% is a KPI that basically my team and the tech team needs to provide, and we provided better than that. Now, your KPI may be something like, as I mentioned before, start time. Okay, it might be something like monetization, again, which may be obviously something very important. It might be how many viewers or how much time viewers are watching. So try to minimize the number of KPIs that you are obliged to meet, and concentrate on one or two. Again, in the case of VOD, now in Yahoo, our main KPI is start time, and performance is tied to that much more than to buffering ratio. That would be my second recommendation.
Let's just let's just do one more. We've got 1 minute left, and I want to get in one more recommendation that our audience can really grab onto.
So I'll quickly mention two. One is multi-CDN, and the other one is a good player in terms of ABR and recovery from problems on the player side, actually.
All right, fantastic. So what I'm going to do at the end here is, since we're wrapping up, is I'm going to run back to the slide at the beginning that showed our email addresses. And I really just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to listen to Omer talk about what he's doing at Yahoo and what Yahoo is doing with streaming. And that was a tremendous amount of valuable information. I think you could write a book on how to stream video and use all of these examples and data that you've just given us in this book, and it would fly off the shelves. That's fantastic stuff. So I'm leaving this slide up here as we end the webinar, so that if there are any questions that anyone has for either Omer or myself, please send us an email. You can reach me on Twitter as well. You can reach the Streaming Video Alliance on Twitter. I neglected to put Yahoo's Twitter on here as well, and that's just at Yahoo. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for taking time with us today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But other than that, I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their day, and we'll see you streaming soon. Everyone, take care.
Thank you, Jason.